So in today's web dev tip, we're going to take a look at the implements keyword in TypeScript and how you can use it to apply an interface to a particular class to make sure that it's got all of that functionality that the interface defines. So let's take a look at an example. It's probably the best way to explain this. So let's say we've got an interface here that's got a few things inside of it. So it defines a function called login, which basically returns a Boolean. And then also there's a username and a password property, which are both strings, and this interface is called hasLogin. So down here we've got a simple user class, which does nothing at the moment. What we want to do is to make sure that this user class always has a login function, a username and a password. In other words, it always conforms to this interface of hasLogin. So how do we do that? Well, we do it with the implements keyword. So we say class user implements the hasLogin interface. And you'll see in our Visual Studio Code setup here that TypeScript is actually giving us a bit of an error. So it's saying that the user class isn't correctly implementing hasLogin, and it's missing the login username and password properties or methods. So we need to make sure that they're in the actual class that we're defining, otherwise this won't actually compile. So it's pretty straightforward to do this. So we could just say we're going to have a username, which maybe we define that in the constructor or something, and we're getting an error here because we've got strict property initialization on here. So we'll just override that with the exclamation mark. And same sort of thing for password. And then finally, we need to implement the login function, and we need to make sure that the signature, the return type, actually matches as well. So we'll just say, just return that the password is equal to password. Oh, and we need to say this.password because we're referencing the password on the class. And now you can see that all of the TypeScript errors have disappeared, and that's because we're correctly implementing the hasLogin interface that we defined above. So everything inside of that interface needs to be defined unless it's an optional property. So for example, if we made the login method optional, so we could then just remove this from here just by commenting this out. And you'll see we don't get any errors because the login method is now optional. So you can have optional properties in the interface and still use the implements keyword. So there you go, there's just an overview of the implements keyword and how you can enforce classes to use interfaces that you've defined. And it's just a nice way to make sure that the classes are conforming to the certain structures that you've set up. So all the objects that you create follow this interface and they behave in a predictable manner. So that's it for this tutorial. Make sure you stay tuned for more web dev tips.